So this is the second book in the Bill Hodges trilogy, or the Mr. Mercedes trilogy by Stephen King, Finders Keepers. Now, of course, if you are a reader in general, this book is mad hype. This book should tickle you just right. There are certain parts in this book that are just, yeah. Stephen King does a great job in portraying what it is like to be just what it's like to be a simp for literature in general, right? And I guess correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess overall Stephen King in this book kind of pays homage to uh, John Updike's Rabbit series, as well as J.D. Salinger in general. These are the two major homages, but of course he makes literary references throughout this book, which is a joy. Uh, but in this second part of the Bill Hodges trilogy, Stephen King pulls a 360 and just goes in a completely opposite direction. In this book, we aren't dealing with, the ramifications of what happened in Mr. Mercedes, the first book. In this book, Brady Hartsfield is barely mentioned. In this book, we are dealing with, a family that suffered because of Mr. Mercedes. And let me say this, okay? I actually feel sorry and sympathetic for the antagonist of Finders Keepers. I forgot what his name is. Bellamy. Okay. I kind of feel sorry for Bellamy in this one because you can really see that what happened to him. You can see that because of his upbringing, he was just cursed from the beginning. Bellamy, although let me get this out. Even though I'm sympathetic and empathetic for him, that does not mean that I absolve him of all the horrible things that he does throughout this book. I just understand the context that led to him becoming the villain that he becomes, the evil person that he becomes. I can see that if he had a bit of luck in his life, he would have turned out to be a completely different person, right? He just was an unlucky person, okay? And he is just so obsessed with the writings of, was it John Rothstein? The Jimmy Gold series. And I guess this is, paying homage to, Updike's Rabbit and as well as J.D. Salinger. Because I'm a reader and a writer, I absolutely understand what, pushes Bellamy to do the things that he does, right? And here is something that Stephen King does wonderfully. In my Mr. Mercedes review, I just completely destroy Brady Hartsfield. He is not an interesting protagonist. I don't care about him at all. Brady Hartsfield is lame as fuck. Here is where Stephen King excels, because in Finders Keepers, the antagonist is interesting. I'm invested. He is strangely charming in a way, Bellamy. He is everything that a villain antagonist should be. He has all of these defects that I can clearly see. And this man, Bellamy, is doomed from the beginning to just to tragedy. Bellamy Morris Bellamy is a tragic figure. His life is tragic. It is a tragedy. And how it ends is also just a tragedy, right? This is the type of villain that I care about, even though I do not excuse all of the terrible things that he does, all of the crimes that he commits. I understand that with a bit of luck, perhaps he would have been a completely different person, and maybe he would have had a positive, a positive good life instead of ending up how he ended up, right? But here is something that Stephen King does that I'm not a big fan of. I actually don't like this at all. Morris Bellamy, he is just obsessed with the Jimmy Gold books. And he just, because of the events in the novel, he just has to wait almost 40 years to get his hands on those manuscripts, right? And when he gets those manuscripts after a lifetime of just sadness and grief and terrible, terrible luck, he gets his hands on those Jimmy Gold manuscripts, and because of circumstances, because the plot has to go forward, he doesn't even get a chance to read any of them. Okay, and I understand that this is some sort of ironic fate, if you want, right? I understand why this has to happen, but I would have loved for him to read a little bit of these manuscripts. He doesn't get a chance, right? Listen, I actually wanted to know what happens to Jimmy Gold as well, just like Morris Bellamy. I was invested in Rothstein's work, right? And to me, it's just it's basically a tease or a cock block that Bellamy doesn't get to read these manuscripts. It was disappointing, even depressing. He finally gets his hands on those manuscripts after almost 40 years of being in jail and etc. And the manuscripts, because of the plot, the manuscripts, they just burst into flames, and Bellamy tries to put the fire out, but he doesn't succeed, and the fire engulfs him as well, and Morris Bellamy burns alive alongside his beloved Jimmy Gold manuscripts, right? So he killed his favorite author, Rothstein, for nothing. He stole those manuscripts for nothing. He spent almost 40 years in jail for nothing. And even as an old man, and all of the bad things that he does in his old age after going out of jail, even those things are for nothing. Everything that he does is futile. Everything that he does is doomed to fail. Everything that he hopes turns to ash and disappears. I'm just like, it's depressing. Everything that happens to this guy is depressing to me. I'm just like, I feel sorry for the guy, right? Tell me if you feel the same about Morris Bellamy, because, at the end of the day, if you strip him bare, he was just a guy who wanted to read some manuscripts. He just wanted to find out what happened to the character Jimmy Gold, because the last novel that Rothstein published with Jimmy Gold, our boy Morris Bellamy wasn't a fan of. So he wasn't a fan of the last Jimmy Gold book. Okay? And and listen, because my imagination is crazy. My imagination is just perverted as hell. This is what I would have wanted to see in this book, because at the climax of this book, the Pete character, he is the one who sets the manuscripts on fire. And he is the only one who has actually read what happens to Jimmy Gold afterwards. He has actually read all of these manuscripts. And this is what I would have loved to see. This is what I would have loved to see Stephen King do. Because in the book, it's a bit goofy. Pete tries to intimidate and threaten Morris Bellamy with setting the manuscripts on fire, and Morris Bellamy, he tries to intimidate and threaten Pete by holding his sister hostage, and this is what I would have loved to see, because Pete is the only one who has actually read the Jimmy Gold manuscripts. I would have loved for Pete to play some mind games with Morris Bellamy. Because Morris Bellamy is so obsessed with the Jimmy Gold manuscripts that he commits murder. He commits all sorts of crimes, and he beats Pete's sister, who is like 13, 14 years old. He doesn't care. He doesn't have a moral compass anymore because he is just obsessed with Jimmy Gold. So I would have loved for Pete to play some mind games with Morris Bellamy. And what do I mean by that? I would have loved for Pete to reveal certain spoilers from the Jimmy Gold manuscripts. This would have fucked with Morris Bellamy's mind. He would have been like, no, it can't be. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, it is mentioned a bit, like Pete says, there are actually 2 more Jimmy Gold novels. And he kind of says, Jimmy Gold meets his old friend and Jimmy Gold meets with his former lover. These are the spoilers that Pete gives, but they're not really, they do not actually fuck with Bellamy's mind. These spoilers, soft as they are, vanilla, they do not shake him to the core, and that's unfortunate. I would have loved for Pete to just drop certain truth bombs about Jimmy Gold that would have just completely destroyed Morris Bellamy, because he is so invested, so obsessed with these manuscripts that he might have lost his shit because of the spoilers. I truly believe this. If you have read this book, I think you will agree with me that if Morris Bellamy heard certain major spoilers from the Jimmy Gold manuscripts revealed by the character Pete, I think that Morris Bellamy would have lost his shit, would have just went apeshit. Okay, but this is something that doesn't really happen, and the books go up in flames. Unfortunately, listen, I would have loved, because even I became a bit obsessed with those manuscripts. This is how godly Stephen King writes this book. Even I, as a reader, was invested in the Jimmy Gold novels, manuscripts, just like Bellamy. And when he gets his hands, finally, on those goddamn handwritten manuscripts, they just go up in flames, and Bellamy tries to put the fire out, and the fire spreads. The fire engulfs him as well, and he just burns alive with the manuscripts, and he doesn't get to read a single word. And I'm just like, I understand. Listen, I understand why this happens. I understand why Stephen King does this. I understand plot-wise, narrative-wise, I understand why this happens, but it's just such a kick in the nuts. Okay? I was just so depressed at the end. I was just like, bro, this guy didn't even get to read a single word. Like, what the hell, right? And yet again, I have to repeat the same criticism that I said in the Mr. Mercedes novel. Yet again, Jerome is just kinda there. Now he is older. He is still kind of the tech guy, the IT guy. He is also Bill Hodges' driver, kinda, and that's about it. And then we have Holly Gibney, who's still just kinda there. She's still that weird, autistic ADHD person. She is also the kind of the IT person, right? And she is a partner with Bill Hodges. They have their their investigative firm called Finders Keepers, whatever, and she's just kind of there. She is not fleshed out. Jerome isn't fleshed out at all. I wanted more from these characters, and the problem is that even in this book, our protagonist, Bill Kermit Hodges, even he is a bit one-dimensional. He is just the detective who wants to solve the case, and that's pretty much it. And we don't really get more of his. We don't get in depth with his character. We still don't know why he is so estranged from his family, because he keeps on mentioning his daughter, but I guess they don't really talk that often, and we don't really find out what the big deal is. And again, to add insult to injury, to sprinkle some salt on an already gaping wound, since Pete is the only one who has read all of those Rothstein manuscripts, we're kind of teased at the end that maybe he will write a summary of those of those manuscripts for a magazine, but we don't really find out. It's just something that he will do sometime in the future, and we don't find out anything about Jimmy Gold at the end. Right? Pete is the only one who knows, and we don't get any revelation whatsoever. And that kind of pisses me off a little bit, right? Because I understand why Morris Bellamy was just so obsessed with this character. He identified with this fictional character, right? He kind of put himself in Jimmy Gold's shoes. He just resonated. He could relate to Jimmy Gold. And this, I guess, this is the magic of literature, of storytelling, of fiction in general, is that the real good books, folks, they just suck you in, and you become obsessed, you become immersed, and of course you relate to certain characters, and you put yourself in their shoes. This is what good literature does. Okay, you're just so invested that you actually live in that fictitious world. You actually project yourself in that world, and you live in it because you just identify with those characters and how they are and their charm and all of the struggles that they have to go through. You just identify and relate. And I think this is the really great aspect of high class literature. They can just suck you in. They get you by the balls. This is what good books do to you. Okay, so if you are a voracious reader, if you just love books, this book by Stephen King, Finders Keepers, will just tickle you just right. And the first Mr. Mercedes book is kinda mid. This one is a bit higher. I actually recommend this one because it doesn't deal with the Mr. Mercedes aspect, not really. There are a couple of mentions and references here and there, but overall we're dealing with something completely else, so completely different, and I am all for it. Now that I have read all three of them, I can clearly say that this one, the second book in the Bill Hodges trilogy, is the best. Finders Keepers is the best because it deals with other stuff. It deals with literature in general. And again, if you are a fan of stories, of fiction, of books, of literature, this one will tickle you just right. And listen, because I am a writer myself, I can clearly see that Stephen King had a lot of fun with this one. He just had so much fun with this one because he keeps on mentioning books and authors and writers and poetry and because literature is plays a major part in this plot, in this narrative. It's beautiful. It's lovely. So if you are a fan of literature, this book in particular, it will tickle you just right. Okay. And again, at the end, we're kind of given a not so subtle hint that maybe something something peculiar is going on with our boy Brady Hartsfield, the Mercedes killer. And listen, by this point, I still don't care. Because, I've read the last book, and I still don't care. Okay? I'm not really that interested. I'm way more invested in Bill Hodges and what he does. And maybe I'm a bit charmed by Holly Gibney, but I'm still waiting for her to expand as a character. Jerome is kind of just there. Again, I have to repeat myself. I want more from these characters. And I will end it with this, because I've watched the TV show. I will give props and I will commend the people who are in charge of the TV show, because they tried their hardest. They tried their hardest to make all of these secondary characters, they tried to flesh them out. They tried to develop them to being three-dimensional, because Stephen King does almost nothing with these characters. I mean, do you remember Brady Hartsfield colleague Freddie Linklater? Right? Freddie is barely mentioned in the first book, Mr. Mercedes. She makes a comeback in the third and last book. Barely even there. And in the TV show, they took this almost throwaway character and they made her like almost the protagonist in the third season of the TV show. Okay, they tried to develop all of these characters, and props to them. We have to thank these people, right? This is what Stephen King should have done, okay? And let me tell you, the third season of Mr. Mercedes is kind of trash, kind of unwatchable, but still, I have to applaud the people in charge of the TV show, because you can tell they struggled to do something with all of these characters, because Stephen King just didn't do it. This was Stephen King's job, and he failed. He failed miserably. If you enjoyed this content, if you want to support your boy, I got a few books on Amazon. The link will be down below. If the link does not work, you can search my name, Griffith Samsara. Thanks for watching. Keep on reading good books. See ya.